Hello, everyone. Today we are doing our 6th audio recording documenting my family history with my mom. And today we are going to talk about, well, what did we do last time? We talked about going to Tuskegee. We talked with my aunt also about their experiences growing up as kids and what the experience was to grow up in a time where things were still segregated. And so we shared racial stories about our experiences with race. And so today we'll talk about these things a little bit more and also reflect on what's going on right now. I think that would be good to talk about.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So you started out in Tuskegee. Your dad was a professor there.
Right.
Then he went to get his PhD at Harvard.
Right, because he'd been teaching it since the end of the 1930s. He'd been teaching there, in the School of Mechanical Industries.
Mm-hmm.
And then the School of Engineering. Then he went to Harvard and got his PhD and started the School of Engineering.
Right. Okay. And then you guys moved to Bucks County.
Well, what happened was Daddy got a job with RCA in the early 50s. He got a job where he would actually be an engineer. He had worked for Raytheon while he was at Harvard. He worked for a company called Raytheon.
Mm-hmm.
Then went back and resumed teaching in Tuskegee, but he got a job with RCA in their space program. He was located in Camden, New Jersey.
Mm. Okay.
And so he went ahead by 1 year and got started. And so I could finish, and we didn't all go that year because I had 1 more year to go at Chandler's Children's House to graduate from 8th grade because it was an 8-year school.
Mm-hmm.
So he came, and we all moved as soon as I graduated from Chandler's Children's House, which I think was, 1955. We moved to, moved north to be with him because he stayed with his Aunt Sweet. I'd have to look on the list to get her real name, but she had a brownstone in they called it, in Philadelphia, they didn't call them brownstones, they called them row houses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like that's what they call the Strivers row houses. That's Strivers Row.
Right, in Harlem. Yeah. Well, she had a brownstone in Philadelphia, so he stayed the year he was ahead of us, and we were still in Tuskegee. He stayed with Aunt Sweet.
Mm-hmm.
And then looked for a place where we would all move to. And the Quakers, the Society of Friends, had a cooperative community called Bryn Gweled.
Mm-hmm.
And this was still segregation time in the North too. But Bryn Gweled was an integrated community. Everybody, it was a cooperative community, so everybody owned their part of the community. It was like 3 acres, I think, was the size of each lot, or 2 or 3 acres. And the head of the Mr. Wilson, the Wilson family owned the house we moved to because Mr. Wilson was in Washington, D.C. as a representative of the Society of Friends, the Quakers, in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
So they were renting out their house. And so Daddy arranged for us that's where we lived. And so when so we moved north and we moved into that house in Bryn Gwylyd, which was in Southampton, PA,
Mm-hmm.
in Bucks County. And that was in Lower Bucks County. And I started high school at William Tennent, Tennent High School in Southampton, which was a trip and a half.
Why?
Well, they weren't really accustomed to Black folk, you know, and I had been raised, having been raised in Tuskegee and knowing a lot of Black history. You didn't get any of that at William Tennent High School. I think they had a paragraph on the Civil War, you know, things like that. Yeah. And not only that, every kid in Tuskegee was going to go to college. And I remember sitting in the class one day and the teacher said, now who's planning to go to college? We're in 9th grade, right? Mm. And I'm looking around the room and just a few people raised their hands. And I'm like, what? You know, so it was a totally different culture. Mm. A lot of working class white people who had moved out from Philadelphia to the suburbs, so to speak. So it was an interesting exposure for me to see this side of people.
Yeah.
But in our community in Bryn Gwylyd, we had a whole mix. We had people who were Chinese American, the people across the street, the Dianos. Pat Diana was in my class. They were of Italian background. There was an African American family. You know, they had a whole combination of folks. So anyway, but the thing about Bryn Gwylyd was that we had they took you into the community. It was a mutual thing, mm-hmm. and if so, then you would get a plot of land, or if somebody's leaving and I guess you could get their house or something like that. And it involved having dinner with everybody in the community. You know, regularly mother and daddy would be having dinner with different families in the community. Mm-hmm. And I don't think my mother took to that really well.
Why?
I don't know, just the whole idea of having to get approval from everybody. She was a more independent spirit than that. I mean, I was a kid, so that was the impression that I got. But the good thing for us as kids was that, you know, we were treated like everybody else, because in the larger community, there's some weird, I mean, for me, these white people did, some of the stuff they did was very strange. I mean, I wasn't surprised, but, you know.
What did we do?
Well, like walking down the hall in high school and these two boys saying to each other, coming the other way, well, that's your girlfriend. No, she's your girlfriend. You know, insulting stuff like that. And I'm looking at them like, oh, please, you know.
Yeah.
And also when I registered for high school, they had me take a test. Daddy took me over to the school. I had to take a test to see if I was qualified to go into 9th grade.
Wow.
You know, coming from the South, I guess they thought, well, this poor kid, she's Black and she's from the South, so let's see if she qualifies. You know, and then in the swimming pool, some kids came up to us, and she took this girl took my hand, and she says, oh, well, she has a moon on her fingers, because somebody apparently told her Black people didn't have like in the bed of their nails. They didn't have a little moon, or I don't know. I just used to look at them, and I went to once. I don't know. Well, yeah, that's enough. Anyway.
What? Say it. What?
No, I was about to tell, but that was in the other town we lived in.
Oh.
So, and we used to go to Friends meeting. It was very interesting being exposed to the Society of Friends culture. So you know, a couple times we went to Friends meeting, and it was so different from church because we were Episcopalians, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, but in Friends meeting, they sat and thought, you know, everybody's thinking, and if somebody wanted to say something, they'd stand up, make a remark, and then sit down. Everybody'd be still quiet. And then if somebody else wanted to say something or comment on what the other one said, they would stand up. And it was a whole new cultural experience. Very interesting.
I went to Quaker meetings before. It's interesting. It's
Yeah,
peaceful.
very peaceful. Yeah.
Yeah. Peaceful way of going about, you know, this idea of religion.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. So, but we lived in Bryn Gwylyd for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents, daddy and mom, were looking for a house to buy. And they found one in Doylestown Township outside of the town of Doylestown. And that's where we moved to. It was this,
Mm-hmm.
you've been there. I took you there.
I did?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. We remember we went to this house, and then we went to Bryn Gwylyd too. We drove.
Was this for your high school reunion? Didn't we go to your high school reunion like a long time ago? Like,
Yeah.
I want to say like 8 years ago or 10 years ago or
Oh
something.
yeah, at least it was a long time ago. But you know, I think I met you, and we drove around, and I showed you the house. And I knocked on the door, but nobody opened the door.
Yeah.
And then we drove to Bryn Gwylyd, and I showed you the house up the hill, up the big lawn.
I think I remember, but that was a while ago.
No, it was quite a while ago. But anyway, so we moved to Doylestown Township,
Mm-hmm.
and across the street was a farm. I mean, a field where they grew, I don't know, corn or something or other. So it was partly rural and partly occupied. Like the house that we moved into had been there for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly enough, and I didn't think about this at the time, but the next door neighbors were Black too.
Oh.
Yeah. And down the road and turn right and go maybe a half a mile, there was a farm that was owned by a famous, the family of a famous Black artist, Henry Osawa Tanner.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear you, doggy.
Yeah.
And the family member who was there was Tanner Moore.
Mm-hmm.
And Daddy got to know Tanner Moore. We'd go visit them from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know much about the next door neighbors. It seemed to be mainly an older woman who lived there, but I guess her family had, you know, moved away or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But so then I went to Doylestown High School, Central Bucks High School in Doylestown.
Oh, okay. So you went to 2 high schools.
Yeah, for 11th and 12th grades.
How was that like moving from 2 different schools? Like,
well, Doylestown was interesting because it was actually an old town. Like Southampton was closer to Philadelphia, and it was sort of like a little halfway. It was suburban, but didn't have a town that I remember. I mean, it did have a town, but it didn't have that small town feeling.
mm-hmm.
Um,
It's hard to think that you're from like small towns because you're such a New Yorker.
oh yeah, no, but
Mm-hmm.
and by the way, I didn't mention that I think I said it earlier on one of the earlier tapes, that in Doylestown, like on the road, in Southampton, one of my sister Susan's classmates was Black. And she lived with her grandparents, and they had their own house on the highway, on the little highway that went through the town of Southampton. And it wasn't like a super highway. It was like a two-lane road. But they'd been there forever, and it looked like they didn't have a front yard, because it looks like they put the highway, which would happen to Black folks, they put the highway through their front yard whenever they built it. Because their house was a real old-fashioned faded wood house, like a Southern house with a front porch. But if you stopped at their house, you had to walk down some steps to get to the house. It was strange, a little bit strange, but it looked like the highway had been put through, and they had to raise the level of the road so it would be consistent, and maybe, but that must have been a long time ago. But anyway, that was their own house. And they were good buddies. They were good buddies. But that's when Daddy told me, because I said that they seemed like they didn't have a lot. The grandparents didn't seem to have a lot. House was painted, and all. Susan and her buddy, I'm trying to remember her name. Can't remember it right now. But they were good buddies. But and Daddy said, don't ever think you're better than anybody just because their circumstances are different from yours.
That's a good message.
Yeah.
Because you never know what people have gone through, or like what, why their situation is their situation.
Right. I know. He was always saying that. Don't think you're better than somebody just because, you had maybe some advantages they didn't, or whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, when we were living in Doylestown Township, Doylestown was a small town, and you could tell it had been a small town for quite some time. And there was a Black community in Doylestown. It was a little Black community, and one got the impression that those people had been there as working for the white folk. I mean, that was the impression that I got. And they'd been there a long time, but it wasn't like a Tuskegee crowd, it was, the kids were not top grade earners or anything.
They were what?
They didn't earn top grades. They weren't in the honors class.
Okay.
That sort of thing.
So it's a different kind of group of people that you weren't accustomed to being in community with.
Yeah, they reminded me more of folks. Not quite. The folks who used to come to our house, and we always had to call them we say Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams used to come to our house and help my mother. And
help her do what?
In Tuskegee, in Tuskegee, we, and when you went outside of Tuskegee to where Black folk lived outside of Tuskegee bubble, you would see a real Southern, what you see in the pictures, real Southern kind of situation. People.
When you say help your mom, what do you mean?
Well, she did. I don't know. She cleaned and maybe help with the laundry. I don't know what. I was a kid. I know she would talk to us, and she was always there. And then she'd go home, at the end of the day, kind of thing. But I just remember Ms. Adams, we called it, because nobody said Mrs. in Tuskegee.
So did Ms. Adams take care of you guys when your mom was out, or?
Yeah, she might, but there wasn't that much. If my mother needed to step out, but she didn't usually. I don't recall her stepping out for anything. Maybe in the summertime,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but I'm not paying that much attention as a little kid to, but I just know she helped my mom. That's all.
Oh,
But
I don't know. I never knew about Miss Adams.
yeah, yeah, Ms. Adams, she was a very nice lady, and um, she helped my mom. Later on, we had somebody else. I think I told you about her. I don't remember her name because it was only for a short time. And but she was the one who had the property. We drove her home one night, and she had this land. She had 400 acres, Daddy said, and
Oh,
she lived in a little cabin, and she had a pot out in the yard. People used to have pots in the yard where they would heat the hot water so they could wash their clothes. That
oh,
it was still like that out in the country for some Black folk, and probably for some poor white folks as well. But I never knew how. Daddy told us that her family owned that land, but right after the Civil War, there was a period when Black people were given some land.
mm-hmm.
I mean, it was hilly and rocky because I remember the highway. The highway was up, and you could look out the window of the car and look down the hill and see her cabin. So I would guess it probably wasn't any good for farming.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
you know, I know there was a period of time when Black folk were given land, but not for very long. Right after the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And
Interesting.
I'm thinking maybe that's how her family had gotten that land, but nobody tried to take it away from them, which often happened if it was good farmland. The clan come riding up and say bye. You know, she still had that land.
Mm.
But yeah, and in Tuskegee also there was a man called Mr. Vines.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've mentioned him. Mr.
No.
Vines, Mr. Vines would come through with a donkey. No, it was a mule and a wagon, an old wooden wagon with great big wheels, you know, the wagon was about this big and the wheels were like that big, like an ox cart kind of wagon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He had fresh vegetables in the summertime. He'd come by and he'd stop outside your house, and I forget what he used to say, but he would call out, and my mother would go out and buy really fresh stuff that he had grown and brought it in, you know, and that was Mr. Vines.
From his farm.
Yeah, I don't know where he lived or anything, but he was a regular, Mr. Vines. He would come and he had this fresh, I remember everything was really fresh because he probably just picked it that morning.
Mm-hmm. That's
Uh,
nice.
but in Doylestown, to get back to Doylestown, that was definitely a small town that went back a little ways. And and I may have mentioned the story of the barber where Daddy took
Yeah.
your Uncle Bill to get his hair cut, and the barber was Black.
Yeah.
And I never heard of a Black barber who only served white people. I mean, it was interesting to me that there was that kind of culture. Daddy didn't even realize it when he took my brother there to get his hair cut. And the guy cut his hair and then took him aside and said, "Hey man, don't come back because you know this is my business." And Daddy got the point. And so they would go into Philadelphia. Daddy enjoyed going into the Black neighborhood in Philadelphia because you know he had lived there for a year, and so he knew where to go to get your hair cut. So he and my brother would go into Philadelphia to get their hair cut. And of course, I straightened my hair. Susan didn't have to straighten her hair, but back then, if you had any nap in your hair, you straightened it.
Mm.
I had a bit of nap in my hair, so
So Aunt Susan didn't have any.
no,
Didn't have to straighten her hair.
yeah, she didn't have to straighten her hair because my mother didn't straighten her hair. I had hair like my daddy's.
And Uncle Bill did too.
Yeah, except the coloring. Uncle Bill's hair was kind of like,
Sandy.
huh?
It was like a sandy color.
Yeah, but it was it was more nappy than not nappy. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but Uncle Bill was an interesting, you know, because he had blue eyes like Mima. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
not quite blue. His were blue-green.
Mm-hmm.
Mima's were blue.
I thought his eyes were like hazel color.
Uh, well, I mean, they may have changed over time, but as I remember it, his eyes were like blue-green.
Mm-hmm.
But because Daddy's eyes were hazel, which was interesting. He didn't have, you know, Daddy's eyes were hazel, so it was between the two sides of the family.
Mm-hmm. And Mima's eyes were blue,
Yeah,
or
Mima's eyes were blue.
okay, interesting.
So anyway, yeah, Doylestown was an interesting study for me, and so there was a whole hierarchy in the town of Doylestown. Obviously, there was a hierarchy of old families in that town, people
Mm-hmm.
who had been in positions of, I don't know what you'd say, leadership in that town. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there was this hierarchy, like I said, with the black folk living over in one particular area. I mean, they had nice houses and everything, but they were all in one particular area, and they were not. They didn't come out of Philadelphia. They'd been there. They
Mm-hmm.
hadn't moved out of Philadelphia, like, you know,
They didn't
people.
like relocate there.
Yeah, no, they'd been there. So um so it was interesting. It was different.
Mm-hmm.
And
Different because you didn't feel like you fit in, or what?
um
Like you were used to Tuskegee crowd, and these were like a different kind of crowd of
yeah,
people.
I mean, like the Tuskegee that I had reached age 13 in, that's
Mm-hmm.
what I was used to, you know. And this was a whole different kind of hierarchical structure in Doylestown, which
Mm-hmm.
which excuse me, I think it's the sinuses and the pollen.
Water. Got some water.
Oh, maybe I might get up and get some water. But anyway, um, so what they did, they had these clubs too, you know, in the town.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was something called the Demolay, which was the women's part of a male club. Um, and then there was a girls' part of it. And actually, they invited me, and I've mentioned this before too. They invited me to join. Um,
This was a black
no,
club.
white.
Oh, oh.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
somebody voted me in, and I went in and had a little initiation thing. You know, they picked me up and drove me to somebody's house, and we had a little initiation. And
What did you have to do?
oh, I don't remember. It wasn't anything. It wasn't anything exciting or dangerous. You know, I've heard of initiations like in black
Yeah,
fraternities where
yeah.
they get ridiculous, but no, this was pretty. I think we had to sit around in our slips. You know, girls we had to take our dresses off and sit in our slips or something.
And do what?
I don't know, recite something or other. I don't know. It was all very, very modest and proper, but just enough to, I guess we were the you know, they were bringing us in, so we had to be in a lowly position for a minute till they brought us in.
Oh,
But after that, they didn't know what to do with me, I think. So when they had the ball, I told you about this too. When they had the um, spring graduation celebration ball, they
mm-hmm.
didn't tell me about it
What?
because it was at the country club, and the country club was segregated.
Hmm.
I guess they wanted to save me the embarrassment. I don't know. And also, um, every year the women's demolay would invite the top girls in the senior class to a luncheon.
Mm.
And I heard about that one afterwards too, even though I was one of the top two. We vied back and forth.
Oh, so you were like number one.
Well, one or two. It depended on what test we had taken most recently.
But you were the top.
Yeah, Sue Mowry and I. You know, and she went to, where did she go? I think she went to Sarah Lawrence and I went to Wellesley, you know. And when they had the reunion that you were talking about before, when they had the Central Bucks reunion, she's the one who had them look me up, you know, find me, because she knew I went to Wellesley. So they checked with Wellesley, and Wellesley sent me a note saying, somebody's trying to get in touch with you. You want us to respond. But anyway, yeah, they had a ball, cotillion. That's what it was called.
Oh yeah, I know what that is.
Yeah, a cotillion at.
It's like a coming out.
Yeah.
Your computer went up, so I can only see like this much.
Oh, sorry, I just shifted it. Yeah, they just didn't tell me about it. I guess they didn't know how to handle it. And so they just didn't tell me about it. And so I think it was Sue Mowry actually sat behind me in Mr. Mason, Herbie Mason's politics class, or problems of democracy class. Mm-hmm. And she said, we didn't see you at the cotillion last night. I said, what cotillion? And then she went,
I wasn't invited.
No, she went, oh, see? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that was the kind of atmosphere that was going on.
It was like subdued racism, or like a quiet racism.
Yeah. The parents and the older generation had it all set up in a racist manner, and nobody had ever questioned it, obviously. But the kids didn't really necessarily know about it. Mm-hmm. In terms of how it affected them and the people they were in school with until these things happened. Mm-hmm. You know. Yeah. So they invited me to this group called the Subdebs.
Subdebs.
That was the name of the group, Subdebs. At the Subdebutantes, I think probably it stood for, maybe. But it didn't connect. Probably some parents said, well, you can't invite her, you know, to the cotillion.
She can participate in the other things, but she can't come to the cotillion.
Well, it probably didn't even happen like that. It probably was at the time they were organizing the cotillion. Some adult told them, mm-hmm. Oh, she's colored. You can't, because that was the term they used back then.
Right.
You can't invite her. You can't invite her to the country club. You know.
But that's where racism continues, you know, okay. When people do things like that. And it's never, to me, it's never like the kids. It's always taught to kids. Like you learn racism. You aren't, you know, like I don't think we are born innately racist. Like, oh, you're a baby and you're already noticing difference, because when you're a kid, like, you know, the story you told about you and your neighbor, the little girl that you used to talk to across the way.
Yeah.
It's like that. It's like we are just like attracted to people as friends because we just like them, you know, like, oh, I just like talking to this person.
Right.
And then what happens is, as you get older, your family or adults will tell you like, oh, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. And so then you say, oh, I get right, I can't do that. And that's
I mean, just like that little story where when you were a little kid and you went to the St. John's, the crafts fair on the grounds, you know, the school crafts fair, and I was sitting and the little girl said, and the mom said, oh, look, you see her? And the little girl said, who? And she said, and the mom says, the little black girl over there. And then she looked and she said, that's not a little black girl, that's Julia. Yeah. I mean, that's part of her separating you out, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, but so,
But
so
that's what happens over time, is that we find ways to find difference, and it takes people to say, no,
mm,
she can go, or it's fine, but people don't do that because they are coming from a place of fear. And I think it's more of, oh, what will other people think?
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if
How will it
we,
affect my children if
right,
somebody sees, them bringing this little
yeah,
black girl, you
yeah,
know?
'cause it's like, that whole thing about calling someone like a nigger lover,
Yeah,
it's like, that's a, for white people, I feel like that's a shame for them. Like, and
yeah.
then they feel like, oh well, if I do it, then I'll be shunned from my own community,
Mhm.
and then I'll be ostracized. So I don't want to, I mean, even if I wanted to invite this person, I don't know what the repercussions will be. So I just will say no, you
Yeah.
know. And I
And so, by the time you were a kid, it was not, I mean, that was an unusual situation,
mhm,
uh, because nobody tried to keep you out of the sports or,
right.
neighborhood soccer or any of that kind of thing,
Yeah.
or people's parties. You were invited to parties and all of that, but it was a consciousness, because you went to a nursery school that consciously was integrated and so on and so forth. But anyway, so
Yeah.
Doyle,
It's an effort. You make an effort to be that way, though.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But Doylestown, back in that era, so to speak, um, not to speak of the era that my parents came up in, your grandparents came,
Hmm.
and Daddy had a way of dealing. I never, that whole story about wiping his, was he was sitting in a meeting and he wipes his head and said something about, well, I better be careful. I don't want the black to come off. He made jokes with it because everybody else in his work group was black, was white,
Right.
but like when we were in Bryn Gwylyd, he was in a carpool because
Hmm.
there was no point with the traffic for everybody to drive to Camden. And so they had a carpool. And one week Daddy would drive, another week another person who lived around there would drive,
Yeah.
but they were white, and I think there were four of them, but the three were white and he was black. But he got along fine. He'd been putting up with this for years.
I,
Stress.
I think that's what, I've been having a lot of conversations with white people, white friends that I have. And
Uh-huh.
I was talking yesterday to one of my friends, and I was saying that I think black people, we as a people, we're trained to accommodate white people.
Yeah.
And, when we're around each other, we don't have to do that. But there's something in the psyche of a black person for safety or survival or whatever that has trained us, that term like code switch, but has trained us to code switch, or to kind of like be this protector of, well, I'll make fun of myself so that, it breaks the ice, or like,
Yeah.
just I know growing up I probably have done that. Like, it's just to make them feel safe or them feel comfortable, at the expense of your own sanity sometimes. But like, that's real. And then, they say in the black community, there's especially like around your parents' time, but even now, there's a higher rate of hypertension,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
especially black men.
Well,
And
Daddy died at 63.
I know that's very young,
Yeah.
and so, but I know that that's connected to this, like, I mean, how would you, like, even now, it's like microaggressions still happen. You still see things happen, and what's happening right now, you know.
That's not a microaggression. You,
No, 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 no. I'm saying every single day, and then I'm saying
oh,
what's happening right now, you know, with George Floyd and like, but it's like now we have social media to document that stuff.
that's the difference.
You know, that's the difference. The difference to me is that now we can showcase what's going on. We can put a light to the public about what's going on, where that kind of thing has been happening for centuries.
Oh
And, you know, so it's just
yeah,
that now it's brought to people's attention on a global scale because you can take a video or send a picture and you can upload it and everyone can see it.
right. And so they can't make up a whole story about what this person did and that's why they got killed. You
Right,
know?
exactly. I'm gonna,
And
I'm gonna try something.
okay,
I'm gonna press, I just wanna see something.